weird that they would do this without an indictment and just a complaint, but I have my suspicions as to why. And, it's quite unusual. The hip hop rap world looks at snitching in different ways. And sometimes people say everything is snitching. There's one guy who's on, he's got a podcast. He thinks everything's snitching. If you plea, it's snitching. If you do this, it's snitching. So people are really divided as to these guys are real gangsters, but now on the other hand, they're snitching. And then other people are saying, well, the guy's a businessman now. He's not a street guy. And, that's just the way, you should do business a certain way. There's a lot going on here, a lot of dynamics. So I don't know why they haven't spoken to the FBI in 3 or 4 months. The FBI seems to think it was just a scheduling conflict, which I find extremely hard to believe.
They said that at the bond hearing?
Yeah, she said it, yeah. We just couldn't get together in the past 4 months. There's 5 different witnesses. None of them could even get on Zoom. They couldn't give you anything. Nope. They just were too busy.
Allegedly had in their possession after the kidnapping and robbery.
Sure. So one thing is, and I thought this was very interesting, it looked like Gucci came out with the exact stuff that was allegedly stolen, saying here's my chain and here's something else. I think that he actually showed some jewelry that was allegedly stolen and that it was still in his possession. That's the first unusual part.
Stop by giving y'all morning and afternoon drops, fam. Plus we got some information I'm gonna put on the second channel. But check this out. There's a lot going on, it seemed like, with the feds. Now I woke up this morning planning on giving you guys the update to the PoohShiesty's transcript that was released. He was the only transcript released out of the 9 defendants. It was the court appearance, 175 pages, 2 witnesses, and a lot of information that people don't know about. But as I woke up, I was alerted that Osama also got arrested by the feds. His charges is unknown. Now I tried to look him up prior to doing this video to see which one to bring to you guys' attention first. It seemed like his information has not been released inside his portal. So I guess we'll start off with the PoohShiesty update and then get you guys updated with Osama as more information becomes available. Now fam, as mentioned, within the last 24 hours on April 13, 2026, something interesting happened in the PoohShiesty federal case. A 175-page court transcript was quietly released to the public. Now here's the craziest part. While most of the other transcripts in the situation remain restricted, PoohShiesty's transcript wasn't. Anyone could read it. And once people started going through those pages, a lot of details begin to stand out. This hearing, which many believe was connected to a bond hearing, had several people present in the courtroom. But one key name was not there, and that was Lontrell Williams Jr., PoohShiesty. During that hearing, the defense also pressed 2 major figures connected to that case, PoohShiesty's father and another defendant, CEO 30. But what really caught people's attention were 2 witnesses who eventually took the stand, and the specific details they gave about what actually happened behind the scenes. Details like how long they was inside the studio that night, what evidence federal investigators say they actually have, and even what investigators believe happened to Big 30's cell phone. Now these are things that a lot of people completely overlook inside that 175-page transcript. I mean, it was just released yesterday. So today, we're going to break it down. The key moments, the testimony from the witnesses, and the parts of the transcript that people aren't really talking about, at least yet. But first, check out our words to remember. I don't give you no angle. I just give you the story. So with that being said, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. We'll jump right to it. Now fam, before we get into the witness testimony, we first have to understand what this hearing actually was and why certain people were even being discussed in the court that day. Because early inside this transcript, the court begins discussing the background of the investigation. Most of us are aware, but according to the transcript, this particular hearing was centered around issues related to the case and the evidence the government says it has collected. Now during these early moments in court, attorneys began referencing communications, phones, and timelines connected to the individuals who were allegedly around PoohShiesty during certain key moments. This is where things start getting interesting, because federal prosecutors began outlining what they believe happened with certain phones connected to the case, and specifically, they referenced the phone they believe was altered and or tampered with. Now on page 12 to page 14, this is where prosecutors begin explaining what they believe happened with the phone evidence connected to the situation. But the part that really started raising eyebrows came when the conversation shifted to what investigators believe happened to Big 30's cell phone. Now according to statements inside the transcript, investigators believe that a phone connected to Big 30 may have been resetted or wiped. It was destroyed by the time he got arrested. Now that doesn't automatically automatically mean wrongdoing, but prosecutors suggested that certain data they expected to find was no longer there, which raised questions for them about when exactly the phone was reset and why. And during that hearing, this became an important discussion point because phones today contain everything: messages, call logs, location data, and communication between individuals. So investigators was trying to determine what information may have existed before that reset happened. And if we fast forward to pages 28 to 31, this is the section where prosecutors begin explaining why they believe the phone data is important. Now, while prosecutors were discussing the situation with the phone, another detail inside this transcript started catching people's attention because the conversation shifted from digital evidence to an actual location tied to someone in the case, and that location was the Star near Dallas, Texas. Now family, if you go to page 28 of the transcript, this is where something interesting get mentioned that a lot of people completely overlook. According to the discussion in court, PoohShiesty's father had an apartment located at the Star in Frisco, Texas. Now for people who don't know, the Star is the Dallas Cowboys headquarters complex. It's a massive area that includes hotels, offices, restaurants, and high-end apartments. And this is important because in federal investigations, locations connected to the individuals became part of the timeline investigators built. So when prosecutors brought up that apartment during the hearing, they weren't just talking about where they live. They were establishing a place connected to the investigation. Because once investigators knew someone had a residence somewhere, they started asking questions like, who visited the location? Were phones pinging in that area? Did anyone travel there around the time the events happened? And this segment is why the moment on page 28 stands out. Now after that discussion about the location in Dallas, the hearing began shifting towards something investigators were focused on. And that was the timeline inside the studio, because prosecutors were trying to determine how long certain people were together that night. Now, according to the statements referenced inside the transcript, investigators began piecing together how long individuals were inside the studio before things started unfolding later. This part becomes important because prosecutors often use timelines to connect witness statements with digital evidence, meaning if someone say they were somewhere for a certain amount of time, investigators would check the statement using phone location data, messages, surveillance camera, and other witnesses. And inside this transcript, the studio timeline begins helping investigators understand who may have been present during key moments. Then the court began discussing this in more details later when two witnesses are questioned about the events of that night. Page 52 to 56 is where the court begins discussing the timeline of people being inside the studio. Now, according to statements inside the transcript, the individuals connected to the situation have been inside the studio for a long period of time, fam. We're talking about several hours of recording, talking and being inside the building before anything went wrong. And this detail is important because it shows that whatever happened later didn't immediately start as a confrontation. According to the witness statements referenced in the transcript, the atmosphere inside the studio was normal for a while. People were moving around, some were inside the recording area, and others were in different parts of the studio drinking and watching football. Now, investigators began piecing together this timeline because they wanted to understand what exactly changed that night. And according to testimony discussed during the hearing, something suddenly caused energy in the building to shift. On page 54, right here's where the transcript starts breaking down how long people had already been inside the studio. Now, according to the description given by questioning, the situation escalated when Gucci Mane's security attempted to move towards the door. Now, that moment is important because according to testimony, that movement is what alerted the other groups inside the building. And that's when, allegedly, Big 30 had blocked the door. When the security members started heading towards the door, that's when people with PoohShiesty had begun to withdraw their firearms, and Gucci Mane had immediately noticed they were outgunned. So now authorities is at the point where this didn't start off as an ambush or a robbery. A conversation happened, and it led to terms not being reached in which firearms was drawn, allegedly. Another key thing is they mentioned PoohShiesty's dad going to Staples, but they can't determine what he actually printed at Staples. They also can't determine whether PoohShiesty's dad had a firearm. None of the jury was ever recovered. The FBI agent admitted they don't know where the jury went. There is no video of the alleged robbery. There were security cameras in the building, but the recording studio itself did not record video. So there was no real footage of the confrontation, no footage of the gun being pulled, and no footage of the robbery. That's why investigators relied on witness statements, hallway surveillance, and phone data. Investigators cannot prove who entered the studio together. They only have still images from cameras in the building, so investigators cannot confirm who who walked in the studio together or who walked in first. PoohShiesty's father was linked mainly through circumstantial evidence. Another important point, investigators say he was present in the studio. He visited Staples earlier that day, as we mentioned, was connected through the phone location data, but they also admitted they cannot confirm if he had a gun, as we mentioned. So his alleged involvement comes mainly from being in the room, conversations described by witnesses, and circumstantial evidence. The real battle in this case is when you read the transcript closely. The real argument is, according to the prosecution, this was a planned robbery to force a contract release. But the defense say this was a business dispute between artists and a label that escalated. That's the court issue the court will eventually decide. And when it came to R.D. Radrick Davis, he's mentioned multiple times in the transcript. R.D. is described as one of the victims, one of the three victims, a recording artist / label owner, a person who had PoohShiesty signed under a contract. The FBI testimony say PoohShiesty wanted out of his contract with R.D. A meeting was arranged at the studio to discuss the contract situation. The defense also confirmed R.D. and PoohShiesty also had recorded music videos together. So R.D. was basically present as the artist / label representative PoohShiesty was signed to. Another moment in cross-examination that stood out, the FBI agent admit something surprising. He said he personally never interviewed R.D. His testimony was based on statements taken by other investigators. The prosecutor basically summarized the case like this. The entire incident started because PoohShiesty wanted out of his contract with R.D. Then prosecutors claimed a gun was pulled. R.D. was forced to sign paperwork releasing the contract. And what's interesting about the transcript frames is that a contract dispute, an artist, and a label that turns into a robbery case. So the backstory is really about music contracts, artists trying to leave labels, money and jury allegedly being taken in the process. During questioning, the defense lawyer asks the FBI agent something very direct. Did you personally interview R.D.? In which he answered, no. He never spoke to R.D. himself. He did not take R.D.'s statement. His testimony was based on statements another detective collected.
Sitting here with you, it could be they have a great picture of PoohShiesty walking inside the building and you can clearly see it's him, then it would be silly to say it's not. But if they don't have that kind of evidence, if they can't produce the kind of evidence that's needed to carry the burden, then that's something that needs to be explored. So I don't know yet.
Totally fair. So in other words, you're not confirming or denying whether or not he was at the studio or whether or not there was a contract dispute or what the nature of that that day was about, right? So that's basically...
Sure, and it would be... Okay. And it would be irresponsible and stupid of me to say, hey, listen, we're not going to deny this. Start giving up things that I don't know whether or not they can prove or not prove.
And look, totally fair what you can and cannot say and what you want to say or not say. Totally fair. I'm just going to go through it with you. Before we go any further.
There's no secrets between us.
No secrets. No secrets.
You and I, there's no secrets.
It's like this. It's like this. Which, by the way, before we go in more back into the government's claims, you mentioned this alleged diss track, right? So there were reports that Gucci Mane allegedly recorded this diss track against PoohShiesty. I believe it's called Crash Dummy. I'm going to read you some of the lyrics. Tell you the truth, you went out like a real crash dummy. And after all that, boy, you still signed to me. I walk in the room, you can feel the pressure building. Blank dapped me up there. Whole time they plotting against me. Thoughts on that? Clients' thoughts on that?
What I was surprised at is what's not in the diss track. And what's not in the diss track is any mention of a gun, any mention of, allegedly a Draco, which was used, which is a shorter version of a long AK-47. No mention of those things. And let me tell you, there's a lot of words that rhyme with gun and Draco because they've been in every rap from here to Kingdom Come. When you have rappers that talk about, these so-called drill rappers that talk about shootings and things of that nature. So I was surprised that it didn't have more detail in terms of like guns were used or things of that nature. I never have an opinion on someone's record or song or diss track because I feel like an artist is going to say what an artist says, and that's from their point of view, and it's from what they feel occurred at any type of situation or something that didn't occur that they feel might sell records. So I don't know. So for me to say like, oh, I was worried about it, not worried about it, I just don't care. It shouldn't really come into play.
So you don't think it necessarily might be coming into evidence in any way?
No, I don't think. The only time it would come into evidence is if Gucci Mane was to take the stand and say, I don't recall what happened that night. I was on medication, or I was drinking and I was on medication. I'm not positive how everything went down, or something of that nature. Then the prosecutor might be able to use that as some sort of impeachment. But other than that, it's not just coming in as evidence. If he doesn't, if he says, he shows up and he goes, yeah, I remember, it's kind of a little hazy, but I remember some things, then it's not coming in if he testifies the way the song plays out.
Let me go through the main allegations from this incident, and then we'll get a little bit more into this. So there is allegedly, according to the government, an argument, and they claim it ends up with Williams Jr., again, PoohShiesty, being accused of taking out a black AK-style pistol, pointing it at RD, presumably Gucci Mane, demanding he sign the contract release paperwork. RD allegedly complied, signed it, and then there is the claim that RD was not allowed to leave as he was held at gunpoint. So there's allegations that Wright also allegedly recorded RD signing the paperwork and being forced to say that he released Williams Jr. from the contract. And then afterwards, it's alleged that Williams Jr. took RD's wedding ring and watch and earrings and cash. It was alleged that other defendants took out guns too and demanded property from other alleged victims. There was an allegation that McDaniel threatened to shoot BP, that MM was choked to the point that he nearly passed out. And embedded in the complaint are what appear to be photos allegedly showing cuts or abrasions on MM's neck and wrist. And there's also a claim that his wallet and watches, a Louis Vuitton bag, headphones, they were stolen. And then I'm just going to read this part verbatim and then we'll get into it. Quote, RD was pushed onto the couch in the control room, causing the victims to believe they were going to be executed. Williams Jr. placed the barrel of a firearm to the back of BP's head and ordered him and RD to leave the control room and the studio through the west entrance of the office building. RD then instructed CW and TD to escort them to their vehicle. As the victims left, MM turned to Williams Jr. and asked him if they were really taking his watches. Based on later recovered surveillance video footage, the target suspects left the studio and the office building through the east entrance at approximately 4:48 p.m. So a bunch of questions here. Bradford, I'll first start with this. If this alleged recording of RD signing the contract against his will, what should we be thinking about that?
So far, I haven't seen the recording, nor does anyone have a copy of the recording as of now. I don't know if there ever will be a copy of that recording. There has been no copy of the alleged contract that has been signed, nor has one been provided during the bond hearing. And they have actually said they don't know if one even exists. They suppose one exists. That's that part of it. Then the interesting part about, hey, am I really having my watches stolen? That's kind of a weird statement to be made between these individuals. And then what I think also is really important is the sloppiness of the complaint. At the beginning of the complaint, if you read, it says, this robbery occurred at approximately 4:50 p.m. at this address. Then later on in the complaint, it says they all left at 4:48 p.m. at this address. So even the sloppiness of the complaint is quite shocking when it comes to someone who's getting charged with a life felony. That's just one mistake that was made in that complaint. There's others that were made and contradictions that happened during that complaint that were very unusual. But there's also another part where they say that Lontrell, Pooh, held this gun to somebody's head and said all these different things. And then there's another part of the complaint that says, actually, he told one guy, hey, put your gun down, don't shoot this guy, or something like that. So there's a lot of contradicting statements that were made within the complaint, not to mention how sloppy the complaint was put together. And during the bond hearing, I think very smartly, they had the FBI agent that actually wrote that complaint. She's only been an FBI agent for 3 years. They had her in the courtroom, but they didn't want to put her on the stand to be cross-examined. They put another FBI agent who was like a 16-year FBI agent. They put her on the stand to testify as to what the other FBI agent wrote in her complaint. The whole thing was quite unusual. And like I said, it's weird that they would do this without an indictment and just a complaint, but I have my suspicions as to why.
Well, this goes back to something that else you mentioned. It seems a lot of this is based on the witness accounts, right? Not of what happened or allegedly happened in that studio. And you mentioned something earlier I want to explore. You're saying these alleged victims told local law enforcement what happened or allegedly happened, but they didn't speak with the FBI. So two questions about that. One, based as far as you know, is what's listed in the government's claims, is that accurate from the reports that were filed by local PD? And two, why wouldn't they speak to the FBI if that's true?
So the first part of that is I don't know, because the reports that I got from that evening from the Dallas PD are completely redacted, meaning it looks like, it's a sea of black that is on these reports. So the reports from that evening don't give me a lot of detail as to what exactly was said or who said it. That's the first portion. So I can't tell you whether or not it's accurate to the complaint. I can tell you the complaint is rather sloppy in terms of what each person said and where things took place. But putting that aside, that's the first part of that. Why wouldn't they talk to the FBI? It could be sometimes something happens and you feel some sort of way that night, and then time goes by and you start to consider my options and how this is going to go, and that I have to be at kind of the FBI's beck and call, subpoenaed to come to Dallas, Texas, subpoenaed on phone calls and different memorandums and different things that going forward. And, it's quite unusual. The hip hop rap world looks at snitching in different ways. And sometimes people say everything is snitching. There's one guy who's on, he's got a podcast. He thinks everything's snitching. If you plea, it's snitching. If you do this, it's snitching. So people are really divided as to these guys are real gangsters, but now on the other hand, they're snitching. And then other people are saying, well, the guy's a businessman now. He's not a street guy. And, that's just the way, you should do business a certain way. There's a lot going on here, a lot of dynamics. So I don't know why they haven't spoken to the FBI in 3 or 4 months. The FBI seems to think it was just a scheduling conflict, which I find extremely hard to believe.
They said that at the bond hearing?
Yeah, she said it. Yeah. We just couldn't get together in the past 4 months. There's 5 different witnesses. None of them could even get on Zoom. They couldn't give you anything. Nope. They just were too busy. They're going to be cooperating, in the level of cooperation that I don't know. You know what I mean? And I don't depend on that on any case. I assume cases are going forward based on the evidence that was presented at a bond hearing. And I assume that they're telling me the truth, that, they're going to be cooperating. The FBI says they're going to be cooperating. So I can't take it as that they're lying to me. I prepare my case as if they're telling me the truth. Right. Whether or not at trial that ends up being the case, it's usually not.
So I want to now go into a specific piece of alleged evidence about your client that was part of this filing, and it was purportedly used, to a support for the arrest. And so it says, the complaint claims that your client was wearing an ankle monitor because he was serving a sentence, like you mentioned, the prior case, these federal charges, I believe drug and weapons charges, and he was sentenced to home detention. He had to wear an electronic monitoring device. And they say that authorities were able to allegedly use the location data from that device to seemingly track his apparent movements near the crime scene. And I believe they say that the ankle monitor was used to track him and William Sr. to a Staples, and the allegation was there that they went to a Staples early in the day to print off that agreement, to print off the contractual release paperwork that they say they were forcing RD to later sign. And the feds also claim that the surveillance video and the GPS data, they put them there. So talk to me about the ankle monitor.
Sure. First, let me just address the Staples thing. I don't even care if they're at Staples. They're going to a recording studio, and normally my clients usually print off the lyrics for different individuals. If you have 5 individuals that are going to be on one record and they each have a section or a part, they'll usually print those things off. So I really didn't care about the Staples thing. The electronic monitor, again, people will tell me, oh, we have this data. This is the data that we have. And then when I get it, it's typically not what they represent. Now, I don't know. It could be exactly what they represent. And if it is, then we'll deal with it. Then, then we don't say a certain defense of, oh, well, he wasn't there or he was in the area or whatever it is. We have to create the defense and create a way to make sure that they're held to their burden, the government. So it doesn't matter what they say, it's matter what they have. So but yes,
was he wearing a monitor? Do you know?
Yes, he was wearing an electronic monitor. And if they have the data and the data is accurate, then we deal with that. But I don't know if that's the case. I had a murder case that I got dismissed that was in Tampa where they're like, hey, this phone, it puts him right at the scene at the time of the shooting. Then I get the data. It puts him within 350 yards of the scene somewhere near the time of the shooting. So it's always some little twist on what they say and what I get. there's usually a difference. Now, I don't know if that's the case here. It might not be. So I have to see what the actual evidence is first, and then I'll deal with it.
Let's talk about the vehicle ID and cell phone record evidence. So the affidavit claims that Wright's father owns a 2020 Dodge Charger Hellcat with Tennessee plates, and authorities allegedly used license plate readers to track the Charger following another car, Dodge Ram, at 2:18 p.m. on January 10th. Then they claim that the Dodge Ram looks like the one on surveillance video near the studio, near the crime scene later that afternoon. They apparently used the license plate readers to also link the Charger traveling close to a white Buick Enclave, and through rental records, they determined that that Enclave was rented by Williams Sr. And the cell phone records for Williams Jr., again, your client and others, and the telematics location data for the cars, as well as the GPS data from the electronic monitoring device, authorities claim they're tracking them the journey from Memphis, Tennessee to Dallas, Texas, that the electronic monitoring device allegedly aligns with the records, tracking to Winrose Tower, where Williams Jr. was allegedly residing, traveling to the alleged crime scene, when they allegedly left the scene, going to the Comfort Inn at one point. And, by the way, with the Comfort Inn, authorities allegedly have rental records from the rooms and surveillance footage allegedly showing them at this location, and that some of the defendants were wearing clothes that were very similar to what the suspects were allegedly wearing at the studio based on the surveillance footage. So I know that's a lot, Bradford, but basically it's digital evidence, right? It's surveillance, it's rental records, it's cars, GPS. Talk to me about that.
So long story short is, if all of that is true, the most that does is put everyone at the scene, right? It still doesn't say if a robbery occurred, doesn't say that a kidnapping occurred. In fact, the jurisdictional element of this is really troublesome because they don't put in the dates of the travel from Tennessee to Dallas. Now, kidnapping is very specific. You have to travel
federal kidnapping.
You have to travel in order to complete the crime that you are accused of. These guys were there for a week or a week and a half recording songs and doing all this stuff. So like the jurisdictional element, they don't even address, where Pooh actually lives in Dallas. The alleged victim came to Dallas willingly, which, again, that's an element of kidnapping that's not there. All these different things about jurisdiction. At the bond hearing, they were like, well, if they use the cell phone to record this signing, then that's the commerce clause and it affects interstate commerce. The problem with that is there's specific case law that the cell phone would have to be used in furtherance of the kidnapping. So filming someone and then sending it to Bob Smith and saying, hey, if you don't pay me a ransom, here's the video of your guy. That's in furtherance of the crime. Filming someone allegedly signing a contract is not in furtherance of the crime. So they're going to have a lot of problem with jurisdiction. I know they're scrambling to try and make sure to shore that up with jurisdiction. But the basic is they found no gun. So they can't say whether or not the gun was made in Texas. If the gun was made in Texas, it doesn't affect interstate commerce. They found no ammo. If the ammo was made in Texas, doesn't affect interstate commerce. The only phone that was used in any of this was this alleged recording, which no one has, and they can't say that affected the actual kidnapping. So they have a problem there. They have a problem going back and forth throughout this case with jurisdiction in terms of proving that the phone or something in interstate commerce was used in furtherance of the kidnapping. That's going to be a real problem for them, which they don't address. And all these complaints, all these indictments, they're very heavy on what they have because they want to make like, oh, we got him here, we got him here, we got him here. What they don't have is they have no guns, they have no ammo, they have no contract, they have no video inside the studio. They have no other witnesses besides only the alleged victims. There were 2 other witnesses in there. Those witnesses say, we didn't hear anything, we didn't see anything, no one told us anything. One of them's the owner of the studio. One of them, I think, is an intern from the studio. And this isn't a massive, big studio. There's a couple different recording studios, but these were the only guys recording there. So it wasn't like they were checking on other studios to see how everyone's doing. There's only one group there. So it's unusual that they didn't hear anything or see anything. The whole thing is weird. And like the fact that says walks towards the door with everyone and says, hey, are you guys really taking my my watches, that doesn't sound like me. That someone that was almost going to get shot in the face then says, hey, by the way, you know, are you really taking my watches? That sounds crazy to me.
So I would counter that as a counter argument.
Yes, counter it.
So the purported injuries on MM, couple that with the idea of what we mentioned. If all of that digital data is true, it might place them at the location. But this is the part that we haven't talked about. Last part.
I'm sorry, I did.